What would you tell clients back in the day when they would come to you and they'd have a 3-year-old and they would have just had, and they have an infant, they have child number 2, and they would say, we're not having sex anymore. We have like an intimacy, we become co-managers of our house. And your response as a clinical psychologist would be, you've got to schedule it. You got to put it on the calendar. And the response always is, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah,
what's the follow-up?
That's great. That's a great question. Well, my first response is, well, how often do you want to have sex? And people hate that. People hate that question. And so they avoid it. They say, well, you know, we don't really want to be that calculating about it. It's like, okay, right, whatever. We're going to parameterize this. Once a year. It's like, no, that's probably too little. Okay, 15 times a day. It's like, no, that's probably too much. Okay, so now we got some parameters here. It's somewhere between once a year and 15 times a day. Let's see if we can narrow that in. And this does make people uncomfortable, right? They don't want to specify their needs and wants. And I think it's
what's the source of that discomfort? Where does that come from?
I think they're embarrassed that they need anything. Right? So it's just fundamental shame. Like it's that same exposure of nakedness. And then they're unwilling to share the information with their partner because it's revealing. And then they're afraid they're going to be rebuffed. And they're afraid they're going to get into a fight. They've got lots of reasons not to want to do it. But
that rolls back to those stories that have been haunting them since they were kids, right?
Yeah. And they don't want to have the difficult conversation up front. And so we might say, well, okay, let's be reasonable about this. It's going to be some number of times a week. You guys have jobs, you have kids, you're busy. You're not going to have a hot date every night. You just don't have time for it. And so why don't we be reasonable about it? We could try, let's aim for something like twice a week. It's like, can you think? Or maybe we could start with once a week. Because once is a lot more than 0. It's a lot more than 0. Right. And so then you think, well, all right. And then they say something like, well, you know, we did all that dating when we were dating and now we don't want to do that anymore. It's like, okay, so what are you saying here exactly? You're saying that you don't want any more romance and you don't want any more hot sex and you don't want to put any work into it. And it's just going to happen magically, even though it's clearly not happening. That's your theory. And then let's run that theory out. Okay, so now you have new kids, and it's going to be like that for a few years, maybe till they're 10 or 11. You're going to be occupied with your family. And so now you have a sexless marriage with no intimacy for a decade. So what does that look like in like 2032 when you're in divorce court?
Right.
How's that?
Or you're recovering from some addiction, right?
Right.
Of work or of alcohol or whatever it is, because your body's got to meet that need somewhere, and if it can't get it a true deep connection, it will come up with all kind of cheap substitutes, right?
Yeah, like an affair.
That's right.
Yeah, so of course you don't want to do this because it requires difficult negotiation. But how would you like to have your marriage deteriorate into hell over a 10-year period? How does that sound as an alternative? It's like, well, that's not very good. It's like, okay, so which of these two things are you more afraid of? And then when people really think that through, they think, oh yeah, well maybe, you know, I could take the risk of making what I want known. And then, okay, so now you specify it. Well, a date, which night, how long? Are you going to find a babysitter? Are you going to do this every week? Who's going to be responsible for what in relationship to this date? All these details have to be negotiated. And then we remember, you know, by the same logic that we've already employed, if this is 2 hours a week, then that's 15% of one day. That's another 5% of your life. And it's the intimate part of your life. And if you got that right, my God, you might be a much happier person. And so that's another one of the only 25 things you have to take care of to set your life up. But I mean, you said, why are people afraid to do this? Is they're afraid to show their vulnerability, man. They don't trust their partner. They don't know how to negotiate. They don't even know what they want themselves, you know? Like, it's not that easy for someone to admit that they need any physical attention at all, even though everyone obviously does. You know, because you're putting yourself on the line then. And that is the definition of intimacy in some sense.
This motherfucker don't miss.
No, he's fucking good.
That motherfucker don't miss, man.
He's good.
In the heat of battle, he don't miss.
No.
In the heat of controversy, he don't miss.
No.